So again, thank you everyone for joining us for part of the systematic review series this spring that the University Library is conducting. This is Systematic Reviews in the Classroom. Next slide, great. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll also hopefully have some time at the end of session for you to unmute yourselves if you have questions, but Annie and I will definitely try to keep an eye on the chat as we're going. And then this presentation is being recorded. We will send out that presentation afterwards today. Next slide, please. So for those of you I haven't met, I'm Abigail Gobin. I'm an associate professor in the University Library, and I'm the data management librarian. So my research primarily focuses around data policy, data education, data management. And I'm here to tell you I've only written like one systematic review, but I work on a lot of scoping reviews with colleagues. So that's truly my preference, is really going for scoping reviews and other kinds of evidence synthesis. So I will turn it over to Annie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Armstrong. I'm an associate professor in the library as well. I'm a liaison to the College of Education as well as the psychology department. I'm probably a bit newer to evidence synthesis reviews than Abigail, but I think that positions me well to think of this from sort of a learner-centered vantage point. So I also, in my role at the library, I coordinate teaching and learning services for the Research Services and Resources Department, and do a lot of instruction to undergraduates. And I'm definitely interested in instructional design, which is why this is an exciting presentation to give along with Abigail. So just to go into our goals for today, we will discuss sort of goals, how to develop goals for including evidence synthesis research in coursework. So developing assignments, considerations in terms of scope when developing assignments, how to break things down to a more modular level versus a more holistic level. Thinking about challenges that your students are likely going to experience in conducting or learning about evidence synthesis. So considering that this is a new idea for your students, how do you present the material in a way that will be successful and meaningful to them? So in developing our presentation for today, we also went through a pretty in-depth exercise of breaking down all the potential sub-lessons within this broader topic of evidence synthesis research. And Abigail will go into that in a more granular level. So hopefully by the end of today, you'll have an idea of different areas that you could focus on, and how to do a scalable version of evidence synthesis, depending on what course you're teaching, what your time frame is, what you want students to get out of the process. Okay, so just to reiterate that a little bit, with any teaching goal, you'll want to start by thinking about, why are you doing this? What is your goal for students? Do you want them to be able to publish a systematic review? Do you want them to sort of just learn about the different options? Do you want them to do a much smaller assignment to just dip their toe into the process? So actually, we would be interested at this point to know, if you're willing to put it in the chat, have you developed an assignment or have you taught anything pertaining to evidence synthesis reviews? And we'll take a look at your responses. And if not, that's fine
good to
as
know
well.
too.
We're not seeing anything. Okay.
Advising, okay,
Okay.
on the classroom, yeah. And when we say evidence synthesis, Annie and I are using that term very broadly. You know, we think about systematic reviews, but there's scoping reviews, there's umbrella reviews, there's all the different kinds of reviews that might get included with these kind of things.
Mhm. Okay, so. Okay, I've talked faculty out of
Out
systematic.
of systematic, yep, same.
Okay. So, yeah, we hope to kind of present some options that are more modular, that are scalable, that allow you to scaffold systematic reviews or other evidence synthesis into your instruction in a variety of contexts. So let's get into some of those specifics. Okay. Oops. Sorry, trigger finger. So we've begun by just sort of breaking down some broader goals within this broader framework of evidence synthesis. So one thing that I wanted to address is also just this idea of backward design. So what do you want students to get? Like, what is the end product? And then how can you build backwards from that? What do you have to have them do to get to that point? So these are some sort of longer term goals. Do you want students to just sort of build various skills to get to the point where they could publish? Or are you actually working with a cohort of graduate students? And your goal for them is to actually submit a journal article for publication. So those are two very different things. Do you just want them to kind of sort of practice and sort of gain training wheels for different aspects of the systematic review search process? So breaking down the search process into steps. Are they familiar with developing a protocol? So a lot of people don't actually know that best practice for doing a systematic review is to develop a protocol. So what is this process? This is actually a much shorter document, but then an actual publication, but that would be a viable project in of itself, is to build a protocol or even a mini protocol. So do you want them to familiarize themselves with other protocols in order to then conduct their own? Or are you thinking much larger scale that you want them to publish a systematic review? So Kim, if you could put a link to our systematic review LibGuide into the chat, I think that that's actually a really good resource for breaking down the systematic review process into different subject areas. And there's also some introductory articles on that page that can teach about different methodologies. What is a scoping view? Scoping review, how do you discern between a scoping review and a systematic review or a rapid review? So there are really a wealth of resources on our UIC systematic review guide that can help sort of introduce your students to various aspects of the process. And then another potential evidence synthesis goal might be appraising systematic reviews or scoping reviews and doing some unpacking of what goes into building a review by looking at publications that already exist. Okay, so these are just some examples of classroom assignments pertaining to systematic or scoping reviews or other evidence synthesis. So as I already mentioned, building a protocol, doing a mini sort of condensed version of a review, or potentially an annotated bibliography. That would be a much smaller scale project where students review a much more discrete number of articles than what would go into an actual full-scale systematic review where they're looking at screening hundreds or potentially thousands of articles. So Abigail's
right.
going to, did I
Yep.
address the challenges? Yes.
Yep, absolutely. So, as you're thinking about this and as you're thinking about what it is you actually want to include, right? Annie's given you a bunch of ideas of different goals that you might want to have. A lot of times, I've talked with colleagues in dentistry in particular, but kind of across the health sciences, where they like the idea of they're going to do a systematic review. What they'd really like their students is to practice searching, right? They'd really like them to get really, because that is a skill. And all of these things require different skill sets that your students may not have been exposed to. So what is the goal we actually want to get them to? And then is there kind of a subset assignment along the way that can help them move towards the idea of a systematic review? And these are some of the reasons why you might not want to do a full systematic review. So when you think about like a true systematic review, I just saw a faculty member the other day was like, I'm going to write one in 3 months. And I'm like, good luck. Good luck, because most of these, when we see them done well, they're 12 to 24 months, right? If you think about all of the obligations that you have on your plate right now and how much time you can build in for the, helping develop the search with a librarian, running through the searches and those initial things, reading abstracts, filtering through all of these things, and putting that in, doing that with a full team. We usually see these take about 12 to 24 months, and that makes them not especially suited for a classroom assignment. One of the current and kind of emerging challenges that we're seeing is interest in using LLMs and natural language processing in order to sort of summarize or synthesize or suggest other terms. I've seen a couple of different uses related to systematic reviews in particular. One is we're just going to feed everything in and we'll see what the LLM comes out with. And at least one of the tools, and I can't remember which one it was, it basically just reworded the abstract and spit it back out to us. It didn't actually, there's not synthesis happening. There is summarization and word prediction. And if the words are already in this order, we're going to get those back. And there's not good assessment of the bias that may be obvious to the humans that are reading the article. It's just not in place in these tools as yet. That may be coming in the next, 5 to 10 years, but there's also, it's reading what's there and can't necessarily identify the gaps in the literature as well, which is something that when we're doing that critical appraisal of any of these articles that we're reading, we're looking for not only what is covered, but where are the gaps and the problems. So thinking about where those tools fit in, what the tool's utility is, and the limitations of those tools is only going to be more and more important. And do you have the time to really understand what the tool has presented back to you? And then one of the other concerns that we run into, and this tends to be kind of with doctoral students, is I run into a couple of students where they reduce systematic reviews to, well, it's just a checkbox. I just checkbox my way through this. And there is kind of a lack of curiosity, right? They're just doing a systematic review. They're just going to answer this question. And it removes kind of that interest or that dive or the really deep engagement with the literature that you might get with maybe a really targeted, shorter type of review, or something that's an annotated bibliography where you might be able to get a little bit more richness, where we're not trying to pressure them into one particular format or assignment. So these are just a few of the emerging challenges that I think we'll have seen. Next slide. And none of us have more time. None of us have extra time. We all know that everyone's pressed on this. So when you're thinking about designing this for the classroom, how long can your students spend on this? How long can you spend on this? And then how does that translate to what might be really useful for you and for your students? So if you're thinking about this as part of a dissertation or thesis work, maybe you have that 12 to 24 months and you can really work with that student and a team and you can do that deep dive. That's probably your best case scenario, is where it is integrated into a larger project and you can really spend and hold that time. Full semester course. There is one of these that is available. I will get the link for you at the end. I do have that up on my screen. I'll get that for you in a second. If you're thinking about a full semester course, we're going to talk about what one might look like, but there is at least one already available in Applied Health Sciences where you could have your student attend that course, cross-list that into things and have them spend a full semester really focused on this. I think we'll see a lot more opportunities for this in the future. But maybe you're also thinking this is part of another course. You could spend 6 weeks on this. What is reasonable to accomplish for evidence synthesis that meets your goals in 6 weeks? And if you're thinking about a single session, well, we're not doing a systematic review, but maybe we're talking about what aspects of systematic reviews to be critical of. There's a lot of different things that we can go into. So my best recommendation is don't assign it as a spring break homework project. Next slide, please. And then there's additional time constraints. So Annie and I talked about kind of, choosing an appropriate review type. Right? So I wrote one recently that was a narrative review. Right? And we started and we kind of wandered our way through the topic. We were looking at copyright in health science literature and trying to understand what information was out there. We couldn't do a scoping review because of literally the difficulty of finding literature about copyright, because the word copyright appears everywhere. And we couldn't do a systematic review because we didn't even have a question. There wasn't a clear question. So what we did was a narrative review that was like, okay, here's what we found. We did some systematic searching. Here's what we found. And then here's the themes that came out of that and the information that we were able to find and the gaps in the literature. To me, that's a much more powerful review than me trying to shove it into the wrong format just to get a particular title. And the scale of the question that you're asking your students to ask, or the type of question, can also be really, really challenging. If they're trying to find everything related to vitamin E, right? How many studies have been done on vitamin E and the efficacy of vitamin E? That's going to be a very, very big challenge as compared to vitamin E related to a specific disease state in a specific population. That's going to give us a much more targeted and narrow search. So when we're thinking about those questions, a lot of times we do have to add parameters, and that limits how often we can reuse that information or to whom it is applicable, right? If we're only looking at people in the United States, that's going to cut out a lot of studies potentially, or it's only really going to be applicable within the US. Or if we're only looking at a certain ethnic population, what is the scale of the question you're trying to get at? And then when you're thinking about the classroom, it can also benefit to think about, is this an individual project where you want students to individually practice a certain task? That's going to be one amount of time. Versus, is this a group project? Systematic reviews and evidence synthesis for us, most of the time, is a group project in most situations. There is benefit to having individual assignments, right? Maybe everybody does their own search build and then we compare and contrast. But what are those within the time constraints and within your goals? What is it that you're thinking about? So I'm going to pause here for a second. Now, I've talked about a bunch of different limitations and what you should or shouldn't do. But are there any other time constraints or any other challenges that you see or have run into that you wanted to throw in the chat? We're just after lunch and everyone's thinking. Well, if you've got any other thoughts on that, do go ahead and pop them into the chat. All right, and let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to hand it back to Annie to kind of talk about
Okay.
what are some of the things your students don't know.
Yeah, and that, of course, this doesn't apply to every student. Students come to us with, you know, a broad range of backgrounds, but in our experience working one-on-one with students, and my own experience supporting people who are conducting their first scoping or systematic review, they come to me with different levels of experience, but these are a lot of the things that come up again and again as areas that they either didn't know about as an aspect of the systematic review process or scoping review process or evidence synthesis, or they had misunderstandings or needed to know more in order to do it well. So, I mean, sometimes they'll come to an individual research consultation thinking, I just need to develop a search, and they might just have a basic knowledge of Boolean searching. But if you look at our systematic reviews LibGuide, which Kim posted a link to earlier, they don't necessarily know the extent to which the search will need to be reproduced for different databases or customized for different databases. The length of the actual search string and what a really good systematic review search should look like. So they might actually think that it's just, and part of this, I think you can blame actual published systematic reviews for. Sometimes when people publish the review, they just share like a little snippet or a really dumbed down version of the search. Whereas to really do this well, it's a much more complex process. So the developing of the search in of itself could probably be an entire week of a course. But that's usually something that people need a lot of support with. In addition to just knowing where to search. So what are the databases for their discipline? Where should they be looking in terms of interdisciplinary databases? And that doesn't even get into the gray literature. So we had a separate webinar that was entirely devoted to why to search the gray literature, why that matters in the systematic review process. So that's an entirely different area. What are the standards and registries for their discipline? What does a protocol look like? Where can you find it? What should it address? So I'm mainly speaking to my own experience with working with the disciplines of psychology and education, but that's often something that's sort of revelatory to students, like, oh, this is a protocol. This is so great. Like, this really helps with planning the entire project. So it's a really useful first step, and people might actually skip over that a lot of the time. So that would be a good sort of introductory part of the process to address. So after I'm really jumping around because this is like a mishmash of different ideas. But after they do the search, how do they manage the results? So they may not know of, I've had people that want to manage the entire process in an Excel spreadsheet, not knowing that we have citation management programs like Zotero, RefWorks, EndNote that can really help them organize and dedupe their results. And then on top of that, we have evidence synthesis software. So we have Covidence or Covidence, however you prefer to say it, that will help you manage the project and organize the process and work with a team. There's a lot that could be on this slide that's not here. So like I often work with people that don't know that a best practice related to systematic reviews or evidence synthesis reviews is that it should be a team-based project to eliminate or to limit bias. So there's a lot of areas that we could have added to this, but it would eventually get too overwhelming, I think. So developing inclusion and exclusion criteria. how much should you gather, when should you stop? And how much time does it take to plan out the entire project? So these are all competencies within this much broader project. So when students are assigned a traditional research paper, I think you can make a few more assumptions about, their familiarity with that format. They still need support, but in this realm of evidence synthesis, I think there's a greater possibility that they don't know about, I would say, most aspects of the process. So you can't just say, this is the project that I want you to complete. You definitely need to unpack all the different components and make sure that you have ample support built in to your instruction. So Abigail, do you have anything to add pertaining to any of these?
No, I think you went through all these different boxes. I think it's kind of interesting. When Annie and I were putting this together, it was like, okay, so what are the skill sets? Because there's write a literature review, which many students feel like they're comfortable with. Often, especially graduate students, when they get to us, they're like, well, I know how to write a literature review. And then when you think about what are all of these different parts and pieces and you kind of drill down in, that first time you do this in particular, it can feel very overwhelming, or there's, all these new steps to learn. So taking a step back, it was interesting for us to document all the skill sets as well, not just kind of diving right into it. And here we go, we're going to answer this question.
So let's delve into what a potential syllabus would look like.
All right, so I'm going to volunteer somebody else's class so you can take this. This course, BHIS 570, which I've just put that link into the chat, and we'll make sure it gets added a couple of other places. This is taught in Applied Health Science by Spiros Kitsu. Professor Kitsu, his research mostly has to do with use of devices and all sorts of different techniques in informatics, but he teaches an evidence synthesis course. So if you are looking for an opportunity for a graduate student, a PhD student, to take a class that is already established, there is one available on West Campus. His syllabus is not what is up on screen right now. I want to make sure we're very clear about that. What we wanted to consider was, if we were to create a 16-week course, and we wanted to take people through the idea of what is in evidence synthesis, or the parts and activities that they might want to do. You could probably do this with maybe seniors. I could see seniors, or like a 400 level course. So you're looking at upper level undergraduates and graduate students, but taking them through over the course of a semester, what could be included. And you'll notice, if you look through this, while we're doing a lot of the activities that meet what Annie just talked about, we're not writing a systematic review. We're talking about each of the parts and pieces that would go in for them to learn, with the idea that they would then be able to do that for a future project. So it's a different approach, and you could probably pull out different parts and pieces. So you'd have an intro. You might talk about types of reviews in the second week, right? I've mentioned scoping and evidence, an umbrella and rapid. What are all these different types? So what is it that we're actually trying to do? The software that goes into this and how to navigate all of that software. We've talked a little bit about protocols, but coming back to that idea of, are you using the PRISMA guidelines, which are one very specific set of guidelines, or are you going to be registering this with Prospero? Are you trying to follow one particular type of systematic review, or is this something where you're not necessarily in alignment with another group? What's normal for your discipline also plays very heavily into that. Finding background information, making sure this hasn't already been done. I think one of the most heartbreaking moments I had was, I was sitting down with a student. She was going to do a systematic review. She was so excited. It was a huge part of her dissertation. and we're poking around and we're just getting started in the literature. And I said, oh, you mean something like this? And there was a team that had, within the previous 2 weeks, published a systematic review that was exactly the research question she was planning on asking, down to like and it was a research team she knew. She didn't know that the publication was coming, but she knew the research team. And we just had to put a hard stop on everything so she could reassess and figure out what was going to happen next. But we want to find that out before they get too far in. You can have them develop 3 to 5 search strings. See what's different between students. Who found what mesh term? Who found what CINAHL subject heading? It's really interesting to see how students approach that differently. And getting into inclusion and exclusion criteria. Does it matter if it's in English? Does it matter, if we're limiting to the last 10 years, is it a rapid review or systematic review? How does that work? What are the other techniques besides building those structured searches? Annie mentioned a lot of times you see incomplete searches listed, and I've been guilty of this too. You publish the paper and you're like, we did searches. They're amazing. You should see the appendices, but the appendices are cleaned up, and we know that. Because no one wants to give you all the dirty messiness. We've tidied that up first. So how did you get to that report? How did you snowball your way through the citations to find things? So we get to those final pieces and some of the messiness behind the scenes of them. Thinking about how we aggregate the literature. When do we not salami slice? If you have a clinical trial that has been reported 3 or 4 times, what decisions do you need to make out about that? And then other forms of critical appraisal. So much of what we're teaching with evidence synthesis is critical appraisal. So you have extracting data, evaluating bias, evaluating the statistics. You could easily spend a month really diving into what does it mean to critically appraise an article robustly, all the way down. And then thinking about the writing process with the idea that they could give a final presentation on some aspect of what it is that they've learned. Again, this is not a real course at this point. This was ideas of the tasks that we know students are learning about and the types of challenges that they might run into or need to practice before they do this for a real project. And we wanted to give you an idea of what a full semester syllabus could look like if you wanted to really customize this for your discipline. You'll have access to the slides, and you're certainly welcome to grab this. If you want a regular course that's all set, grab Dr. Kitsu's. Next slide. So we've been talking about this from a classroom perspective, and we hope that if you are going to be engaging with this, that you will reach out to, if you're going to be pulling these kind of assignments into the classroom, that you'll reach out to the university library. There are a number of us who do evidence synthesis projects, evidence synthesis lectures and instruction. Kim's just given you the link directly for librarian support. And there's a few different ways that you could approach this. One is to reach out to your liaison librarian. So I was the dentistry liaison for a long time. They have a new liaison, but ways that I might help as a liaison would be, what are the disciplinary databases? Where do we need to go look? Do we need to look in DOS? Do we need to look in Embase, PubMed? Where are those that we need to look? Figuring out what some of the search strings are. There's language that just that disciplinary language, it's going to take time and familiarity to really be able to dive deeply on. Same with gray literature. And then helping to connect information into Blackboard for those assignments that you do decide on, working with your students either in the classroom, if you want to bring them over to the library. Are we going to do group consults? Are you sending a PhD student for an individual consult? Whatever it is that you're deciding to do with that, please do reach out to your liaison early so that we're able to partner with you and really truly make this a meaningful engagement for your student. If you're looking at something more structured, you've got a PhD student is going to be doing a systematic review or a scoping review to get their dissertation started, or this is part of a bigger project that everybody's working on. that you're probably going to want to talk to the library review team. And there's a couple levels of support that we offer there. One is, looking really at just kind of a consult, right? We'll do a consult with the team, we'll meet with you and help you kind of work through some of these processes. If you would like a librarian to assist with the searches, search development, and that kind of thing, we do that with our availability, and we do occasionally get fully booked. There's a lot of requests right now, so please do reach out early in your timelines to talk through what kind of requests you're interested in, what kind of assistance might be useful for that kind of thing. That may go beyond your liaison. Not all of our liaisons do review work like this, but they all should be able to help with the kind of disciplinary stuff or kind of those deeper dives for your subject. So if it's something like if you're doing a scoping review in education, I'm certainly not going to be the contact for that. I would want Annie to, maybe I'm helping with the actual review, but Annie's going to work very closely with me to make sure that we know all the databases that we need to be in and all of those different things. So it just kind of depends on the team that you end up working with. Next slide. Annie, I will turn this one over to you.
Well, I encourage you to take a picture of the QR code here, or Kim will also put the URL in the chat. This will take you to our Zotero folder, which should be openly viewable. And what we've done is assemble a series of links that are particularly highlighting resources that you could incorporate into the classroom. For example, there's a YouTube channel. I'm sorry, Carrie, what is her last name? Carrie.
Oh, Carrie Price.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. So she's sort of like a mover and a shaker in the world of teaching systematic reviews. She has a blog and a YouTube channel and a lot of short videos that would be ideal for just embedding into your Blackboard page, for example. So I encourage you to look through those links. We've already shared our systematic review research guide, but there are some that we've curated in that list from other libraries that are specifically focused on how to teach systematic or evidence synthesis reviews from other universities. So I encourage you to peruse those in your own time and to relating to the last slide, to get in touch with us if you want to discuss any of the approaches to creating assignments or teaching reviews collaboratively with a librarian. That's something that we would definitely be open to brainstorming with you about in order to really plan sort of the best approach for your class and your instructional goals. So this is our individual contact information. So you're also welcome to email us personally, either Abigail or myself, if you want to talk further about anything that we brought up in the webinar, or if you have any questions about anything that we mentioned. And we have a link to our series here that will show upcoming webinars in the systematic review webinar series.